Housing has become expensive almost everywhere. Rents rise year after year. Home prices jump faster than salaries. For many people, housing now takes up most of their income. This is not just uncomfortable, it is economically dangerous. When housing costs rise faster than wages, households lose financial stability, consumption falls, savings disappear, debt rises. This is usually the first visible sign of a deeper structural problem. The frustration is strongest among younger generations. Many did everything they were told to do. They studied, they worked, they avoided major mistakes. Yet ownership feels impossible. In previous decades, housing was difficult, but achievable. Today it feels locked behind an invisible wall. That gap between effort and outcome creates anger. Economists call this a breakdown in expectations. When people lose faith that the system rewards work, social trust erodes. High housing costs also distort the broader economy. Workers stay in jobs they dislike because moving is too expensive. People delay having children. Others move far from city centers and accept long commutes. Productivity suffers. Labor markets become less flexible. Cities lose dynamism. Housing stops being a neutral background good. It becomes a bottleneck that limits growth. This is why housing crises often lead to political crises. This is where the phrase "just build more houses" enters the debate. On paper, it sounds correct. When demand rises faster than supply, prices increase. This is basic economics. Many economists therefore see the solution as obvious. Increased supply and prices should stabilize. But for people living the crisis, this answer feels disconnected. It sounds abstract. It ignores how long they have already been waiting. It also ignores who benefits in the short term. The anger is not always about economics. It is about timing and fairness. Even if more housing lowers prices in the future, that future can be decades away. Meanwhile, current renters pay the cost. Homeowners often benefit from rising prices. Investors benefit too. This creates a perception that policy favors asset owners over workers. Whether or not that is the intention, the incentive structure looks that way. Perception matters in economics almost as much as reality. This is why the housing debate feels so emotional. It is not just about buildings. It is about security, dignity, and stability. Housing is not a normal consumer good. You cannot easily substitute it. You cannot delay it without consequences. When housing fails, people feel trapped. That emotional pressure makes simple answers feel insulting. Before discussing solutions, it is essential to understand this lived reality. Without that, no policy explanation will ever feel convincing. The idea comes from basic supply and demand. When more people want something and supply does not increase, prices rise. Housing is no exception. Over the last few decades, population growth, urbanization, and smaller household sizes increased demand. At the same time, construction failed to keep up. Economists look at this gap and see a textbook shortage. From that perspective, the solution appears obvious: build more housing until supply meets demand. There is strong evidence supporting this view. Cities that restrict construction tend to have higher prices. Cities that allow more building tend to be cheaper. When new housing is added, nearby rents often grow more slowly. Over time, prices can even fall in real terms. This pattern appears across countries and political systems because the data is consistent. Many economists treat the issue as largely settled. To them, the debate is no longer about whether to build, but why we refuse to. This argument gained popularity because it is simple and measurable. You can count houses, you can measure shortages, you can compare cities. This makes the problem feel technical rather than political. It also fits well with market-based thinking. If prices are high, the market is constrained. Remove the constraint, and the market should correct itself. That logic is clean. It is easy to communicate. It spreads well online. Channels like How Money Works emphasize this clarity. They focus on zoning laws, height limits, parking requirements, and slow approval processes. These rules restrict supply even when demand is obvious. In many cities, it is illegal to build anything other than single-family homes. This creates artificial scarcity. From an economic standpoint, this is inefficient. Land in high-demand areas is underused. Prices rise as a result. However, this framing also narrows the conversation. It treats housing mainly as a quantity problem. It assumes that if enough units exist, affordability will follow. While this is often true in the long run, it ignores short-term dynamics. It also ignores who controls the new supply. Markets respond to incentives, not moral goals. Developers build what is most profitable, not what is most needed. This is where public frustration begins. People here just build more houses as a dismissal. They are not rejecting economics. They are reacting to how the argument is presented. The phrase sounds final, as if no further discussion is required. In reality, supply matters deeply, but supply alone does not explain timing, distribution, or lived experience. That gap sets up the conflict that dominates the housing debate. Building housing is not just a technical process, it is a legal and political one. In many cities, zoning laws strictly control what can be built and where. Large areas are reserved for single-family homes only. Apartments, duplexes, or mixed-use buildings are banned. Even when demand is high, supply cannot respond. This is not a market failure, it is a policy choice. Local politics reinforce these limits. Existing homeowners often oppose new construction. They worry about traffic, noise, and changing neighborhood character. More importantly, they worry about property values. Housing is the main asset for most households. Any perceived risk to its value triggers resistance. This is known as NIMBYism. From an individual perspective, it is rational. From a societal perspective, it is costly. Permitting also slows everything down. Approval processes can take years. Developers must navigate public hearings, environmental reviews, and legal challenges. Each delay adds cost. Higher costs mean higher prices. Smaller builders are often pushed out. Only large firms can survive the uncertainty. This reduces competition and innovation. The final housing becomes more expensive before construction even begins. Construction costs themselves have risen sharply. Land is expensive in high-demand cities. Labor shortages are common. Materials fluctuate in price. Financing is sensitive to interest rates. These factors limit how much can be built, even when rules allow it. The idea that builders are simply refusing to build is misleading. In many cases, the economics no longer work without high-end pricing. Time is another constraint people underestimate. Housing supply adjusts slowly from planning to completion. Projects can take a decade. During that time, demand continues to grow. This lag means that even good policy changes feel ineffective at first. People experience rising rents while being told relief is coming. That gap fuels skepticism and anger. All of this explains why just build more houses feels unrealistic to many people. It is not that building does not matter. It is that building is constrained at every step. Laws, incentives, costs, and time all interfere. Ignoring these barriers turns a valid economic insight into an empty slogan. Understanding these limits is necessary before any solution can be taken seriously. When new housing is built, it is rarely cheap. Most new units enter the market at the high end. This is not accidental. Construction is expensive, and developers need to recover costs. Land, labor, financing, and regulations all push prices up. As a result, building affordable units from scratch is often unprofitable without subsidies. The market responds to incentives, not need. This creates a disconnect in public perception. People hear that new housing is being built, yet rents continue to rise. They see luxury apartments replacing older buildings. To them, supply is increasing, but affordability is not. Economically, both things can be true at the same time. New housing does increase supply, but it does so in a specific segment of the market. The benefits spread slowly. Economists describe this process as filtering. New, expensive housing attracts higher-income households. Those households move out of older units. Over time, those older units become cheaper in relative terms. This is how market housing eventually supports affordability. The problem is speed. Filtering can take decades. In fast-growing cities, demand often outpaces this process. Prices rise faster than filtering can work. Investment activity further complicates the picture. Housing is no longer just shelter. It is also a financial asset. Investors buy properties to rent, speculate, or hold. This increases demand without increasing supply. Short-term rentals remove units from the long-term market entirely. From an individual investor's perspective, this makes sense. From a market perspective, it tightens supply. There is also a geographic mismatch. New housing is often built where land is available, not where demand is highest. Jobs cluster in city centers. Housing expands at the edges. This pushes workers farther away. Long commutes replace affordability. People may pay less in rent, but more in time and transportation economically. This is still a cost. This is why new construction alone often feels disappointing. It helps in the long run, but offers little short-term relief. The benefits are indirect and uneven. Without complementary policies, people experience only the pain, not the payoff. This gap between theory and experience fuels distrust. It makes people doubt that supply can ever solve the problem. Affordability comes from scale and location. A small increase in supply is not enough. Prices fall only when supply grows faster than demand for a sustained period. That means building a lot, not just a little. It also means building where people actually want to live. Density matters. A few tall buildings can house more people than entire suburbs. Zoning reform is central to this process. Allowing duplexes, apartments, and mixed-use buildings increases supply without expanding cities outward. It uses land more efficiently. This lowers per-unit land costs. It also supports public transport and local services economically. This increases productivity while reducing housing pressure. Public and social housing also play a role. Markets are good at providing housing for those who can pay. They are less effective for low-income households. Public housing acts as a stabilizer. It removes part of demand from the private market. This reduces competition for remaining units. When designed well, it improves affordability across the system. Infrastructure investment is equally important. Housing supply cannot grow without transport, schools, and utilities. When governments fail to invest, housing becomes politically harder to approve. People resist density. When services are already strained, coordinated planning reduces this resistance. It turns growth into a benefit instead of a threat. Tenant protections can also ease short-term pain. Rent stabilization, longer leases, and eviction protections reduce displacement. These policies do not fix shortages, but they buy time. They make the transition toward higher supply socially sustainable. Without them, political backlash can halt construction entirely. The core lesson is balance. Housing affordability requires markets, policy, and time working together. Building more housing is essential, but it is not sufficient on its own. When supply, regulation, and social policy align, prices stabilize. When they do not, simple answers fail. Real solutions are slower, messier, and more effective. The housing crisis continues because the debate is oversimplified. Supply matters, but slogans do not solve complex systems. Building more housing is necessary, yet slow, political, and difficult. Ignoring that reality creates frustration and backlash. Affordability requires more than construction alone. It depends on zoning reform, public housing, infrastructure, and tenant protections working together. When one part fails, prices keep rising. When people feel ignored, trust collapses. The problem is not economics. It is communication and policy alignment. Housing will only become affordable again when supply is increased at scale, and the process is honest about costs, time, and trade-offs.